Part of the Bible that says what we just saw, and it's the very beginning, which is page 1, picture in the church Bible. Shouldn't be too hard to find. By the way, we have some people running a marathon this morning, and haven't heard it yet, but it's good enough for Carl Bell. They ran the marathon in 2 hours and 15 minutes, but he hasn't finished yet, so he didn't make that. Have you read this chapter, Genesis 1? Anybody? Okay, you've heard about it. I mean, it's probably one of the most famous parts of the Bible, right? The 7 days of creation. Have you ever wondered, did this project actually take just 6 days, 144 hours? And God just made everything to look like it was really, really old? I mean, that's a possibility. God can do anything. Or on the other hand, have you kind of guessed that, as many scholars say, that each day is a long age? It could be translated that way. And have you ever wondered, well, does this kind of sync up with some kind of God-guided evolution? Have you ever wondered about that? Have you ever wondered, for example, day 1, when the light's created, what exactly is that light if you don't have any sun until day 4? Ever wondered about that? And if you've got the vegetation on day 3, and then the sun on day 4, I was taught biology that plants kind of need the sun, right? And these are a bunch of things I'd like to answer today. And most importantly, where in this are the dinosaurs? Right? I mean, isn't that a big question? So like I said, I'd like to answer all that today. Except I also like to watch the Bronco game at 6:30 and actually go to bed at night and so on. And so actually what I will do is mainly see if we can't hear and see what God most wants to say and show, which is a lot and beyond our complete comprehension. But he does have things to say, and here's how I'd sum this up. It's not so much, here are the mechanics and the timetable of the way I got everything going, though that's not important. But more so, what God most wants to say and show is, here's the way I created you to live with me. Here's the way I created you to live with me and to live in this world that I have given you. We've been taking some time to think about running at the pace of grace, and that leads us into this strange, wonderful gift called time. And it's this flow of an unknown future into a blink of the present, into the remembered past that we can't control, right? Talk about time management. We can't manage it. We can't control it. And yet we can make choices about the sorts of things we're going to do in the flow of time. In other words, we can make some plans. Bill Good, after the first service, said that some famous scientist, you heard once talking about this, said, do you want to know how to make God laugh? And the answer was, just show him your plans. Now, obviously, our plans are fallible. Our plans aren't necessarily always fulfilled. And yet, God made us with some freedom, that we'll emphasize all the more next week, to do things and to live in time and to anticipate certain things that happen within His sovereign wisdom and so on. And so we make plans. You may have some plans which could be the next 30 minutes. Like listen or check your email or whatever. You've got plans for the rest of the day. There's a bunch of our people that got up extremely early to either run a half marathon or marathon downtown, the Rock and Roll Marathon. You obviously had some sort of plan to come here this morning, and then you plan to have some lunch, plan to, take a nap maybe, and plan to watch the Broncos beat Indianapolis tonight. You have your plans. Maybe you'll be talking today about what my grandson used to call the World Series. And, or like on Mall, you'll just be grieving terribly when it's not in it. But we have plans then for seasons of life. We have plans for, school, careers, family, and so on. But one of the most common spans of time, besides an hour, a day, a year-long season. One of the most common spans for making plans is what we see reflected in this passage. The 7 days that make up what we call a week. And it's a pretty practical, wise way to do some planning, because a week it's short enough where you can have a fairly good idea of what's likely to happen and what you can do. And yet it's long enough where you're not just kind of going through the motions, but you have to be somewhat intentional as to what you'll do, and hopefully sync it with some bigger purposes for your life than just sort of existing. But I want to show you that from this passage, there's something even more significant about this little span called a week. And to start with, let me just talk about where our calendars really come from. Look at verse 14 here in Genesis chapter 1. And put up here as well. I encourage you to look at the Bible. We'll be flipping around a little bit in this chapter. But here's the 4th day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the vault of the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them serve as signs to mark seasons and days and years. And let them be lights in the vault of the sky to give light on the earth." And it was so. God made 2 great lights, the greater light to govern the day, and the lesser light to govern the night. And he also made the stars. I like that last line. It's sort of like, I think I'll put some other lights up there. And by the way, it shows his power, the old bunny trail. But embedded indirectly in this whole narrative is all kinds of indirect references to the various gods, the various powers that were worshipped by other cultures. And it's a picture of how, in a way, these are nothing for this sovereign God. Stars govern for many people, especially the Babylonians, the way they lived. And God just sort of threw them out there. It's a statement about God. Well, but here you've got this 4th day. And what it's got to do, makes especially these 2 great markers of time that give our lives some meter rhythms. I mean, think about how we break down our time. We've got this thing called a day. How's that measured? From the most ancient of times. It's signaled, a day is signaled by the sun rising regularly, or as we know more precisely, the Earth's rotation, so that we have a certain number of hours of sunlight and then we lose it. What's a year? A year is also determined by the sunlight. It's the cycle of where the sunlight lands in different places on Earth. Basically, as we now know, it's related to the Earth's orbit around the sun and the Earth's tilt relative to the sun. And then we have seasons. Now, this is also related to God's creation, because the seasons have to do with the sun and so on. All the more have to do with the earth. And so you have seasons where these things grow and then lay dormant for a while. And so we have planting seasons, we have reaping seasons, harvesting, and so on. And then along the way, we have months. Do you know where the word month came from? It's from that lesser light called the moon. And so in all ancient cultures, they had a rhythm was related to the cycles of the moon, from full to disappearing kind of, roughly 28, 29 days. And cultures had something like a month related to the lunar calendar, the lunar cycles. And by the way, in ancient cultures, all of these rhythms were based on a fear-based assumption that these cycles of these bodies represented great powers that ran their lives, namely gods, and worshipped, and there were attempts religiously to appease these powers called the sun, the moon, the stars, the earth, and the sky. And it's not illogical to respect and even try to be in sync with these huge powers around us. So that's how we get a good part of the rhythm of our time. But have you ever thought about this? Where did we get the cycle called a week? What body in creation does that come from? You ever thought about that? Here's where we got a week. This is the one cycle that's not an expression of what God has ingrained into creation. It's a response to what was revealed directly right here in Genesis 1. It's one cycle that's not an expression of what God ingrained into creation, but it's a response to what he revealed directly to Israel. It's one cycle where God said, I better get clear about this one because I made these capable but limited human beings to work certain ways such that they do well to work hard for about 6 days, but then they're going to need some kind of a break. It's rather important in that you see, have you ever heard the Ten Commandments? There's a big one, the fourth one, that talks about the Sabbath. A word that literally means stop. That's all it means. Cease. And so God says to Moses, for Israel, 6 days you shall labor and do all your work. You were made in God's image to work. The seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord. It's ceasing to the Lord, your God. On it you shall not do any work. And here's the reason for it. 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. And various cultures have had versions of weeks that were less or more than 7 days. There's a few. There's some out there. But most of them have, from ancient times, had 7 days that they use as a kind of rhythm. But it's interesting where it differs a little bit. After the French Revolution in the late 1700s, for about 10 years, the very anti-Christian, anti-church leaders imposed on this new society a 10-day week. I realize some of you have that kind of schedule, but the whole society was required that you have a 10-day week. It was partly to break the grip of the church on the people with its rhythms of Sunday worship and so on. But also, it was, think about it, to be more productive. You work 9 days and then take a break instead of working 5 or 6. You know what? Didn't work. It didn't work. And they went back to the 7-day week. After the Russian Revolution, for about 11 years, the Soviets experimented with a 5-day and then a 6-day kind of week. And again, it was to break down the religious rhythms these atheist leaders wanted to see done. But also, because they then knew for sure that communism was the most productive economic system ever invented, it allowed the happy workers more rest. Guess what? Didn't work. And do I need to tell you that communism really hasn't proved to be very efficient and effective? And so in 1940, under Stalin, trying desperately to disassociate it from anything religious, they went back to the 7-day week. Now, I'm not trying to declare here that a week is some kind of absolute holy, sacred entity for good living. And yet here it is in the Ten Commandments. Here it is, seemingly rather important. And it does raise very important questions about the rhythms that we need. And so the plans that we make to use our abilities to accept our limits, to work creatively and to rest joyfully. And so what I want to do is look at this description of God's week here in Genesis. And where it all starts is with a big mess. And I'm not kidding you, because in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And what did it say, verse 2? Now the earth was formless and empty, darkness was over the surface of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. Now, on the one hand, it's just as murky, dark, whatever. And yet, God's before it in the beginning. God's hovering over it by His Spirit. And then, as the first day begins, God speaks into it. And He speaks into the darkness, this light. And so you have day one. It's a beautiful pattern here. What is formless, the first 3 days, God forms. It starts with light. So it gets it cleared. It separates out some other basic elements, water and sky, sea and earth. He gives each thing a name. God shapes what is random. He clarifies what is vague. You see how he's giving form? There's still a lot that's not distinct, but there's more clarity in these first 3 days. And then days 4 through 6 are essentially filling what was empty, filling what God has formed. And so in days 1 light, he places the majestic sun and moon and stars. In days 2 sea and sky, he places fish and birds. In days 3's land, he places animals and humans. He's filling out the structure and the order, but he's also breathing into it some life, some freedom into that order. I don't know if this analogy works, but it's kind of like putting the software into the hardware. Or it's kind of like putting the music into the rhythm. There's all more life and freedom as that happens. And I'd say, especially as we look at the last 3 days here, 4, 5, and 6, I mean, God goes a little bit wild. At the end of this account, chapter 2, verse 1 says, and God completed his creation of the heavens and the earth in all its vast array. Let me ask you a question. Don't you think that when you consider creation, just all the galaxies out there and all the species, was all that really necessary? Now, I've talked to some true scientists about this. They say, well, actually, Steve, it isn't necessary. You see, we didn't have billions of galaxies and stars out there. This is what keeps the cosmos from imploding. Okay? And we need millions and millions and millions of species of plants and animals and insects to balance the ecosystem. Well, I think that's probably very true. But don't you think that maybe God, when he's created the universe, just said, hey, this is going to be fun. I'll just make several billion galaxies that earthlings will never even know about. And even today, we don't know everything that's out there. Maybe he did it just because out of his own pleasure. And then think about the 6th day before he was created, and all the animals, as well as the fish and birds before that. I mean, don't you think God just said, yeah, I think my creatures would really enjoy seeing some penguins and elephants and ladybugs. You know, he just kind of got extravagant. Especially with humans, he's creating this gift called freedom, where the creating continues, the forming continues, the filling continues, the joy continues. And I love what God says to Job when he's saying, Job, you cannot understand all my ways. And he describes creation. He says that this morning stars were singing and the angels were shouting for joy. There's just this extravagance of God filling what he's formed with his boundaries. And then day 7, he stops. Not because he's tired, but he wants to rest in all the good that he sees. He wants to simply be with his creation and creatures. And the question I'm raising for myself today, what is that beautiful picture that's finally about glorifying God? What might that have to do with our weeks that we navigate, that we plan? So just for a minute, see if it doesn't speak a little bit into your spans of time. Just think of a week, for example. This week that's ahead, October 20th through, say, the 19th. What do you think is going to happen? What are you planning? There's a lot that you don't know. There's a lot that's out of your control. For sure, what you do know, there's obligations, the stuff you got to do because your boss said so, because your parents said so, because your wife said so. There's a lot that I hope not, but there could be some disruptions. You get sick, it might be an accident. And yet, as I said before, we still have choices. We've got choices in the way we do what we've got to do, and we have choices even quite a bit in what we will do with the time that's given us this week. But here's the battle. Using kind of language here. What even apart from the battles we have with our own sin and foolishness, God's still forming in his life in order and filling with his life of freedom. So we can plan and work out with his rest. But we're in a big battle with powers and voices that want to cloud our vision of what's best, that want to squeeze us into little cogs and big machines, that want to stuff us with imitations of life, and want to leave us weary, but not rested. You know how that works? I mean, Jesus said this is the way it's going to be. In this world you will have trouble, which literally means pressure. Squeezing, stuffing your life with less than life, draining you, clouding what's best. And of course, Jesus said, in the world you'll have pressure, but take heart. Because this kind of world, this kind of time, these kinds of pressures, I've overcome. And so what do we do? Well, most simply we come to Jesus and we ask, Lord, I've got this day ahead, I've got this week ahead, I've got this life ahead. Would you, from the Father by the Spirit, would you continue forming it instead of letting other powers squeeze it? Would you let my Spirit, God, fill my days and my week? And instead of just letting other powers stuff it with what's less than life? And would you ultimately bring me to the rest that only you can provide instead of just the drain that this world brings on? Now, what might that look like? I want to get a little practical and very down to earth. When you've been planning the week, the discretionary time that you have, what do? You think of all the possibilities. Do this, do that, set aside such and such. And I want to say that when you do that, when you look at all the possibilities, almost always, all human creativity, all human planning, almost always starts in Genesis 1:2. Your day, your week, is formless and empty and dark. All right? Now, let me explain what I mean by that. Even apart from the reality of sin and foolishness, there's no shape, there's no substance, it's all dark. You know what I mean? Have you ever done a home project? For starters, I hope it hasn't been domestic whirls, but what do? I don't know. There's a million possibilities, and you think, well, we'll never even figure out what to do, much less do it. And then once you do it, this is happening at our house right now. Our friend Carl Masho came over, and he created a huge, huge mess. All in the name of creating something beautiful. And we're getting closer to that, but it starts with a mess. Have you ever tried to write a paper in school? Or sermon? It starts formless and empty and dark. You know what I mean? Except for you geniuses. Have you ever been part of a committee of some kind that's trying to figure out what to do, to make some plans, and you're doing the brainstorming, you're up on the whiteboard, thinking of all the different possibilities, and it can be really fun for some types, but have you ever gotten frustrated doing that? And you think, this is getting nowhere, it's formless, it's empty, it's dark, nothing's going to happen. Some of you will gather with your family or friends in just a little while, and you'll say, hey, where should we go for lunch? And you won't be able to figure it out. It'll be empty and formless and dark. But here's part of the wisdom here. If this is the way it started with God, and I dare say all creativity starts this way. If it started this way with God, just be patient. Let the process take its course, especially you can be patient with perseverance and hope if you actually believe that in the chaos, in the mess, in the emptiness, the formlessness behind it, and even hovering over it and willing to speak into it, is a great and good God who didn't just once upon a time create the universe, but through Jesus is recreating things, and in the most practical of things, He's able to give some shape and some substance and some goodness in the things that we're trying to plan. And this is where we can ask a couple of questions. Father, how this week, for example, do you want to form it? In a way that fits the way you form my life, the unique purpose, gifts, callings you've given to me. So that just like when you created the universe, you brought light into it, and you started to make some separations. You clarified this was that, and this was something else, and you put up boundaries between certain parts of creation. And so, Father, in my life, what are the boundaries where I can say yes to this but no to that? Because I have a unique purpose and calling and giftedness. See, that's the form that we need to discern and remember and clarify. And then we can ask the Lord within that, Lord, how do you want to fill it? How do you want to fill it with your life, with your freedom? Where there's not just doing what other people say I've got to do or what I instinctively want to do, but where I can make some choices that have mostly have to do with faith and hope and love and the way I do things. And where can you fill it with some unplanned freedom for the surprises? You know, you talk about forming and filling. Some of us go so far on the forming side that we're really efficient, but we're like machines. You know, there's not a lot of heart. And yet, some of us, on the other hand, we're all for filling our days with life and with freedom, and you know, we're like happy clams. They're just drifting along in the ocean. And you see how they're both pretty important. It has some structure and order, but also some freedom in life. And God's the one who has the wisdom to do this in our lives, that we seek that. The bigger problem is fighting this battle against the powers that want to cloud and squeeze and stuff our lives in what's less than God and less than life. And here's a basic piece of practical wisdom. When it comes to planning our days, our weeks, and beyond, we need to fill our lives, we need to literally fill our calendars with what's most important before other powers fill it up. You know what I mean? You get proactive on saying, these are the things that matter the most, just like the apostles in Acts 6, just like Moses being talked to by his consultant father-in-law. Step back from the way you're wearing yourself out, wearing everybody else out. Let's get some clarity on the form of your life, your calling. The big picture. These are the things that must be done, not the tyranny of the urgent. Get clear on that, and then let God fill it in from there. You know, I first had to really learn this when my life was getting a little more complicated as a fairly young husband, young father of 3 little kids, and a brand new pastor. And just had a lot of things I was trying to juggle. And you know, it was all really good to be a husband, to be a dad, to be a pastor. And any given week, there were something like 1,000 things to do. You know how that goes? At least 1,000. I think the best I ever did with 1,000 things to do was I maybe got a 50 or 60 of them done. You know how that works? I mean, this is true. Probably almost any vocation, certainly in the mix of all the different dimensions of life. If you've got any kind of to-do list, how many of you always get everything done? Anybody here? I mean, if you do get it done, you probably aren't really trying to do much. But, you know, so this happens. And what about the things that did get done? If, say, 1,000 things to do and I got 30, 40, 50 things done. You know what they were? What I discovered in those years? For the most part, it was the things that were urgent, but not necessarily the most important. You know how that goes? And I had to learn from Moses. I had to learn from the apostles. Slowly but surely, and still learning this. And I confess to you that I've had, and I have, spans of time when I'm not just overworked. I mean, look, you're always going to have times when you're overworked, where you can't eat, okay? It's part of living. And that's not so much the issue. But here's what's beneath it. I confess spans of time that were formed more by satisfying people than following Jesus. And spans of time that were filled more with less than the best forms of busyness and escapes that brought temporary relief from the weariness that finally were not feeding my life. They were draining my life. And I had to go to God and confess that, realizing that it wasn't just draining me, but it was actually hurting the people I loved the most. And I believe kids have forgiven me for when I acted like parenting on the job was more important than parenting them, and I believe my wife has given me tremendous grace when I had a mistress called work. And it wasn't that the work was bad. It was good. It's just that I wasn't letting God shape and fill what He knew was best. I had a friend back in those days who was pastoring a church in Kansas. He went to a different church, but we had become friends. And it was a little, very small church, maybe 40, 50 people. And he and his wife were leaders. In fact, they really were truly great people. She was a school teacher. He was in real estate. And he said to me one day, you could just tell, you could see how tired he was. And he said, just besides the normal stuff in life, where they have many kids and working on their jobs, he said, in church, between the two of us, we're doing 30 jobs. Fairly significant jobs. And it seems like the church will collapse without us. And they keep putting pressure on us to do more and more. And he said, I hate to leave the church, but I think we just need to get out of there for a while. And he said, would it be okay if we came to your church, the Covenant Church? And Steve was, I said, yeah, great to have you. I also wanted to guard against, so not hurting the body of Christ. But I realized this was probably needed for John. And I said, sure, but only on one condition. One single condition. I said, you can be part of our church provided you don't do anything for 1 year. You just sit, you take in whatever, hang out with some people, but you are not allowed to do anything. And he actually almost teared up and just said, that would really be okay. It's not just okay. I think it's what God wants to give to you, and you must follow that. Now, I was a little tongue-in-cheek, because week by week, you can just see some kind of life returning. And it's about 6 months into that year that John came up to me and said, hey, you know that deal we made? Can I do something? And, we let him use his gifts. And he continues to serve God in that community. You see what he needed, but you see what I was learning? And to do that, you got to get some clarity week by week on what you're going to fill your week with. But then you got to step back and get some clarity on what's forming it. What's the big picture here? What matters the most? Why did God create you? How's He gifted you to be a blessing in this world? And it's not just that you know it, but it sinks in deep, so it's part of what you're becoming. And here's where I want to conclude. To do that, there have to be times, there must be times, when you don't do any forming or any filling, you just stop. You just stop. Just like God did, just like God said we need to. It's really interesting that you have humans created on the sixth day. They're created in God's image. Why? To co-rule with Him over creation, to keep the forming going, keep the filling going, to keep the creativity going. And we're going to talk about that next week as we look at a close-up of this guy named Adam and the way he worked the soil and named the animals and so on. But if you ever thought about this, humans are made on the sixth day. What's the very first thing they do on this planet as God's creatures? What's the very first thing they do? Nothing. made on the sixth day, their first day is God's seventh day. They don't get to work. They simply become human beings, not human doings. They're given this gift of rest, not because they're tired. I don't suppose you'd be too tired if you've only been around for half a day. We don't rest because we've been working so hard. We are made to work out of the rest that God gives, which ultimately is not just sleep, but not just taking a break, but simply being with Him and all that He's given us. I mean, this includes practically in our planning, accepting our limits, saying no to even some good things that compete with the best. It means allowing some margins of unplanned, unexpected stuff, which is inevitable. It means especially to give some high priority to some unrushed time for rhythms. A few times during the day, during a week, and during longer spans, unrushed time where, for example, you take off your watch, you shut down your devices, you get attentive to what's around you. You say, this is a day when I don't have to do anything or give anything. It's a day to just receive whatever God might provide. It's not selfish. You're going to bless others if you allow yourself to receive like that. It's especially a time such like these where we set aside the time to open ourselves fully to God. It's such times that storyteller Garrison Keeler says, it's when you take your bearings, the example I give is just getting in fellowship with other believers. It's where you take our bearings, because if you miss that, then you're just following your nose. Tell you what, this gift of simply being with God and others in creation, it's not a nice thing if you have time. This being with God and all He's given is really the reason He's given all the rest of the time. And it's the way that instead of these hostile forces squeezing and stuffing our lives, it is the way, such time, that we can allow God to form it and fill it, clarify it, and give us His rest. And it's finally not about time, it's about us. It's about us realizing we're loved, we're made by God in His image. It's about our hearts being formed and filled. And so sometime before the day's over, I want to encourage you to find a quiet place with Jesus. And maybe just hold up to what represents your week ahead or your month ahead or whatever. Get out, turn on your calendar if you have a thing like this, or I'll have Carl finished marathon. That's good. I really should shut this off during church. It's very distracting. But I hold up. This is half my brain right here. It's a great tool. It's got my calendar. Most of your names are on here somewhere. But there's a time I just hold it up and say, this is not my God. And this is, my times, as the psalmist says, are in your hands, Father. And I surrender all that this represents to you. And I ask that you form it and fill it with yourself. And mainly, would you form and fill me as your son, as your servant. Father, may that be our honest prayer from our hearts for your glory, for this world's good,